You're live right now.
Yes. So, hello everyone. Good evening. This is Vishala. I'm founder director of Identity, and we are into destination marketing and branding. For the last 10 years, you are all aware that we did several civic engagement projects and campaigns. We promoted cycle to work, and we promoted car-free commute, and we also organized Rahagiri Day. We are the first city in South India. We got inspired from Gurgaon, and also we built networks, and we promoted several other causes when it comes to the urban living. And actually, if, I have noticed there was, like, whatever the small or big project or a campaign, there was a particular pattern, and a lot of this culture and creative entrepreneurs were getting benefited, and there were people getting all kinds of collaborations. They were entering into partnership building, and in fact, people came back and told us that how happy and healthy they were after attending our campaigns, which were more into physical fitness and mental health. And there were like micro entrepreneurs instantly getting platform, and that is when I have noticed, like, there is actually something. If we could actually do a small project or a campaign, and if we could bring this kind of, it triggers so much of change. How about doing something which is permanently? And that is when I actually looked at placemaking, and how about, like, getting these places as a interface in building communities and bringing social change. And actually, this lockdown also, we have seen lots of changes in our lifestyle. We are like now used to working from home, and we don't need to go to office as well. So there are some positive changes, but there are also negative impacts. So our interaction with our neighborhood is limited, our interaction with our friends are limited, and the family members are limited. And this is actually given a lots of the adverse impact as well when it comes to physical and mental health. So that is when actually I looked at it like, what are the new trends and opportunities in placemaking, and how people are getting used to this kind of lifestyles, and how urban planners are thinking, and how urban designers are thinking, and how the place experience or a travel and tourism segment is looking at this kind of a new behavior. So today we have a very good expert panel with us, and I will go not exactly in order. We have actually very good diverse combination. We have Mr. Maheep Singh Thapar, an urban planner, and we have Milena. She is a place design expert, and we have Shoba Mohan, who is into travel and promoting conscious travel and sustainable development. So I would actually, I don't take much time. I would this will be more of an interactive session, and we have our partners. Placemaking India as one of our partner, and Isocarp is our knowledge partner. In fact, Milena is the board member of Isocarp, and this we will make it very interactive and engaging. If you have any questions in between, please feel free to comment on our social media channel, so that we will pick up these questions and I'll ask our experts. So without wasting much time, I would let Mr. Maheep Singh Thapar to speak.
Thank you, Vishala and Jamiti, for this wonderful opportunity and to be with you all, the eminent panelists and participants right now. So I think Vishala has given a broad introduction, and being an urban planner and in practice for almost 2 decades now, I'd like to take a general view, knowing fully well that most of the things which I'm going to speak are known, you're aware of these things, but this is a kind of a reiteration of some of the general aspects to remind ourselves, because city planning is a multidisciplinary kind of a field, and it's quite complex. And as cities grow, it gets even more difficult by the day. So I'm going to do a general presentation with lots of images, and maybe just 7 or 8 text slides where I'll pause and make some comments. The rest of it would be a free-flowing talk from my side, my views, and basically to get us all into an engaging kind of a conversation, and something which we can continue to do after this event. So I'm going to cover these points in the backdrop of the COVID pandemic, and including with the perspective of the future of the challenges what we may be facing. The future is always exciting, and also there's an element of uncertainty. In fact, that creates more excitement and the challenge. So that's why I kind of titled this that although we are going to talk about placemaking per se, the whole idea is about urban living, and that what is in cities which makes us like the city, what attracts us to the city, and what is this excitement of living in a city. So I call it the excitement of city life. The life itself is exciting, and I'm going to give a different dimension on this point as we move forward. And that's my next slide is, to put it if in a few words. It's very difficult to put it in a few words, but jobs, we need jobs primarily. Most of the people are living either by legacy or they come to cities for jobs. That's related to our economic growth, and it has a implication and kind of ramification on the kind of lifestyles we live. And then the kind of lifestyle we live creates as a cycle of economic growth, and in fact it has a multiplier effect. So these have our actions have impact on various sectors of the economy. What we do in the city, we travel by particular modes, we consume food, we have entertainment options and all that. So the important thing about cities is we feel, I want to say this, that we feel there is a sense of freedom. But yes, it does give you that energy to feel free. So these are all debatable points, but this is just to guide the conversation. So I hope the panelists and the viewers will understand what I'm trying to say. Is also the city is all about new ideas and different ideas, and the options to choose, options to live life, and if something goes wrong, we can have different options. Sometimes things are going better, and we go for more options. An important underlying factor of the order of facility which humans want is the type of education. Higher order institutions or educational institutions are located, we know that, largely either in the city or in the hinterland or close to the city. And then healthcare. So we can argue about this and debate that if people living outside cities or in rural areas are healthier or not, especially in this kind of a pandemic background. And then, does city living actually make us healthier, or we are prone and vulnerable to bad health? But then we have options. Again, going back to the caption I told, options of availing a particular healthcare facility because it's a higher order, maybe we can say at a tertiary level service, which we find only in cities. Are also about lights. It's about color, and you know what? It's what we are talking about. That it's about life and vitality. So let's go through these images quickly. I just don't want to promote a particular city, or it's a kind of form or an imagery which I would like to highlight. We think cities is about buildings. Yes, it's about big buildings, tall buildings, more buildings. Now, whether they're orderly or chaotic or dense, or there's order in chaos, we can have a discussion on that. They have great views. We take a flight, or anybody who can do that, we look at cities from the top, they attract us. They create this sense of the scale and the complexity and the beauty, and their interesting edges with the water, or transportation lines, or big structures. This is something which skylines which attract us to cities are also about people and traffic. I will get back to people later on, because I'm talking about people from the congestion point of view. Look at the cities. The bigger the city, the bigger the problems. And we say, wow, this is a big problem. Big problems, big cities, I think they go together. But yes, traffic and vehicles, that's what we look at. There's a very interesting thing we'll think about cities, and as planners and architects or urban designers, we always talk about what is built and what is not built. So there is an ongoing parallel discussion on whether the nature should be in cities or the city should be built in nature. But wherever human beings have been able to balance it with open space and built and unbuilt kind of a relationship, it creates a great environment and a great feeling. So there is a relationship which is empirically studied and then practiced as a form of theory, or a methodology of planning and architecture and urban design, is about built and unbuilt. So then we know, coming specifically to the topic we are going to discuss today, is that if there are spaces, then we can make them places. So that's where the difference comes, that once we have spaces, we can bring in the energy and the vitality, and people and activities, they make it a place. So this is a relationship between the building and the space, and the activity in humans. And then we know that what attracts us is big monuments, big structures, and if there is this particular kind of space around it, why people would like to go to lakefronts or large monuments, large parks. So just to give an imagery, this is the city of Hyderabad. It's a big market around it. Of course, lots of things going on there. But then they create this sense of, I would say, they captivate our imagination with the light, the color, and the people. And then this is how they coexist: the human activity, the vehicular movement, the large spaces, and then cities which are fortunate to have enough to have a waterfront or a lake, like in Hyderabad or Bhopal and a couple of other cities in India. So they create this extra sense. They give a different dimension, a character to the city. Cities are also about people, and as we move forward, we know that every day the populations in the cities are increasing. So people are, people are there for the city, and the city is there for the people. And then there are all kinds of people in different age groups or different economic classes, different social classes, different abilities. It's what kind of makes it interesting. What more shopping interesting, retail or wholesale or whatever. People would like to go out, they want to eat out, they kind of enjoy the experience. So I think we have experienced experts who will speak more about it. A traditional Indian market, which is a planned market, which is a concrete brick and mortar shops, and again we have kind of tarpaulin sheds, temporary structures. Many of you would recognize the market. This is fruit and vegetable market, and then there is an interesting space between them where people walk and then they buy. So that experience of shopping is very important part of our life. This is a different part of the world. Look at the population, the color, and yes, it looks chaotic, but we can discuss about that. Streets play an important role. All of you have experience of working on streets and how important the streets are in the planning kind of philosophy. But the streets, we have multiple uses of the streets, and what more than this wonderful picture where we have vehicles, pedestrians, and a cricket match going on, right in the middle of the road. So we have to pause here that cities are exciting, no doubt. Cities are very, very exciting. And then we know the challenges, because with the good, the bad exists too. And we see it every day, we experience it. There are a lot of challenges at the global level. We know that the total urban area, although it may be limited, but the kind of population it holds is immense. And these cities do generate the kind of economic growth which human beings aspire as a community or a species or a civilization. But then, yes, the cities also consume so much energy. They emit such a huge quantum of greenhouse gases and also the solid waste. So it's a very important thing to plan for our cities in the future, knowing as much as possible the kind of implications it's going to have on our lives, on the natural environment, and of course the management context. So I'm going to kind of just comment quickly on this, because this slides are available with the organizers and Jamiti, and it's open for you to read and discuss and give a feedback, comment, whatever you feel like. So it's not a definitive statement, but we know that there is a socioeconomic reality. While we talk of cities, there is a purely rural area, is a large population living in a country like India, and also a population in transition, and also a population which lives in the periphery of the cities, which we call the peri-urban or the fringe or the hinterlands of the cities. So what do we focus on? And it's a dynamic thing. It's happening every time, every day, every moment. This change, I mean. We know in India that most of the Indian states have one big city, and then the next city is much smaller in size and population. We call that as a primate city concept, or an empirical kind of a reality. And then it keeps attracting more and more people. So a quick comment from my side would be to raise a question and also give a kind of suggestion, but open to discussion, that we need to think at a regional level and the tier 2 and 3 cities. So I'm not saying that I'm the only one talking about it. Governments are thinking about it. They're doing things about it. But the rate at which things are happening, we need to give it a little more focus and emphasis. Coming to an important aspect which we have been discussing, especially after the pandemic, most kind of talked of subject is the quality of life. As pollution was the kind of a larger problem, and then open space availability, and finally healthy living. That are we really healthy, which includes our physical and mental health. So the kind of physical the dimension to our discussion is that do we have, I mean, kind of first provide the kind of spaces, whether it's open green lung spaces we call them, or just forested areas to produce oxygen. Then the cultural spaces are important where people interact. There is cultural activity. It helps us from a psychological perspective. And then, yes, outdoor recreation spaces. So the action plan, I think it's about quality of life through some defined parameters. It has to be a kind of a matrix, and it's not easy, and it has to have a metric or measurement, and then it has to be a multidisciplinary and integrated approach. So we know that what is not visible, a large part of is the water supply and sewage and the stormwater drain, which probably goes underground. Or but this is an important aspect which impacts our quality of life. There's too much congestion, not just on the streets and the road because of the vehicle and the people, but also there's too much congestion is leading to a lot of pressure on the basic amenities which make our life better. Let us not forget that these are things which are not visible: water, sewage, stormwater, solid waste, and power. The important point I'd like to kind of close my the text slides, maybe another one after that or two more. But the important point is of closure for me would be to talk of how we are going to manage the cities and the regions around it. We know that there are legal aspects and legal dimensions which will take a lot more time for us to discuss, and definitely not in this session, because we are trying to highlight and throw out some important messages. But the point to remember is that who's going to manage and run the cities? We know the local bodies, the municipal bodies, what kind of challenges they face, what kind of resources they have, because they are going to be our partners. We have to ensure sustainability when these bodies become strong enough and perpetuate and do the continuity of what we are discussing, the ideas. And they depend on the state for various kind of support, So day-to-day operations is a challenge. So in this, we have to ensure that the city as a whole would need to be run efficiently and profitably and financially, but then it's not pure material and economic terms and monetary terms, but also in environmental and social terms. Planning, I don't want to talk too much. We have to keep pace with the changing times, and cities are changing all the time. There are, as I told, that the cities need to be looked at from an intrinsic point of view, but also how it's linked to the larger region around it. And that's how the planning and governance would have to be relooked, So quick urban forms, there's good examples of planned gridiron or related kind of urban patterns of cities, whether it was Chandigarh, Gandhinagar, or Bhubaneswar. People who are aware of California and Barcelona, the well-known kind of urban pattern of Barcelona. But then India is about a lot of people, organic growth, So I'm not trying to put anything in good and bad light. The equity issues, the housing conditions, how the rich and the poor coexist. I think so. Coming to placemaking, I think it's not, although it may seem like an event-based activity or a very micro thing, or an attempt at a micro level. Why it is an important part for a planner or for everybody, all of us as citizens, is actually that if we have a pattern at a macro level and they happen like that, it happens like a pattern at macro level. And then once interconnected and integrated with the plan and the overall pattern or management systems, that would create a huge impact on kind of improving the quality of life. So I think I'll take a few minutes only now. This is Necklace Road in Hyderabad. A lot of attempts we can kind of discuss and debate about this was good or this was not good, but it created a public space. Thousands of people, and sometimes tens of thousands of people come here in the weekends. A water edge, a waterfront, and also a large open recreation space, and different types of activities. Some private sector driven. Then political rallies happen there, melas and carnivals happen there. It's the same space, but used in very different forms. So it really serves a great need for the city and the people. A street in Pune, planned streets, and we need the space for that to create a place. But without the people also, it looks great. It creates that sense what we have been wanting in city life. Vishala would know what this is. Is the activity she had coordinated on the Necklace Road. Quite I would say, successful campaign. So I think we should now start thinking beyond smart or smart green or green vibrant, or especially vibrant and healthy cities. What do we need to do for that? Are we going to have for plan for a new urban form or a type of urban development, decentralized or hierarchical? What about the public transport thing? So these all things have to go together. And I repeat the point of the governance that people have to be involved more. Governments are recognizing it. I'm not saying nothing is happening on this front. And then the kind of participatory process, the role of resident welfare associations, the partnership we say is PPP will definitely tackle a big, I would say, chunk of the challenges we are going to face in the future. But then somewhere we feel that the people, really, when we say it's public and private, then the people are left out. So then I would like to kind of push a new terminology, which has been already, it's not my original idea, but it's part of the people who have got inspired from, and I kind of promote this. It's a public, private, and people partnership. So we have to involve, there are now legal mechanisms coming for that. Irrespective of that, for the success of the models, whatever, whether it's street life or people's participation or making activities and placemaking, I think we have to go for a PPPP model, and things will change and new challenges will emerge because the cities are always in transition. So I think I would like to end here. It's not the end, but it's just the beginning, because as we are more aware and we get together, I think we can come out with better ideas. And with that, I would like to close my presentation and thank you, and leave it to the moderator. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Maheep. That is excellent insights. In fact, I completely agree with you on the PPPP model, and for the cities to foster the destination to become more progressive, we need all kinds of partnerships. Sometimes it is public and public partnerships and private and public. In fact, sometimes it should be between people and people, and that is where these public spaces actually play a major role. We have actually witnessed this through our campaigns and our projects. And you spoke really well from the Indian context, and I have been to Netherlands, Melina, and I have seen what is happening in Amsterdam. How great the experience of cycling and walking in the Amsterdam squares. And I've been to Rotterdam as well. In fact, last week I wrote a post about Rotterdam experience. So how do you see placemaking? In fact, UK is going through the lockdown again, and there's a lot of issues happening. And how do you see the placemaking as an approach, an agent of change, in bringing people to normal life? So how do you see? Can you share some insights?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the presentation I have prepared for this webinar, the placemaking as agent of urban change, I already showed it like a month ago, and between then and now, so many things happened with the lockdown and everything. So some of our ideas may look almost like, oh, this is never going to happen if we have pandemic going on. But I think let me maybe share the screen and go through the presentation, because the first part of the presentation is about Rotterdam, and I will just fill you in on some of those details, how it is going on with lockdown and public space. Okay, share. Can you see the bright screen?
Yes, we
yes,
can.
you can see it.
Okay. Yes.
Excellent. So, okay. Let me just first very shortly reintroduce myself. You already did it, Vishala. Thank you. But again, for those outside of India, so my name is Milena Ivkovic. My background is architecture and urban planning. Since 2017, I'm a member of the board of the directors of Isocarp, which is International Society of City and Regional Planners, and it's based here in the Netherlands. I'm originally born in Belgrade, in Serbia, in East Europe. I came to the Netherlands some 20 years ago. And together with Stefan Nikolic, I have my own office, Block 74, where we are looking to unify people, places, and technologies. So my specialty is public space design and public participation. And I'm also leader in the Placemaking Europe network. And within the Placemaking Europe network, I'm also sub-leading the Placemaking Tool Test Day crew. So this is the image from Rotterdam. It's a city where I live. It's the city where my practice is. And if we talk about placemaking, first of all, there are a lot of definitions. But I think that one of the best definitions, or let's say missions, to describe placemaking and its aim is that the mark of a great city is not how it treats its special places, but it's also how it treats its ordinary ones. So that's very important. As we saw in the previous presentation, urban life develops around ordinary, everyday places, and we really need to take good care of them. If we talk about the method, we could say that placemaking is actually building on existing spatial assets of the city, whether it's a street or a square. And placemaking is using creative capacities and different design tools to improve everyday life. So this is just my own quote. That's what I said, anonymous placemaker underneath. I think that we as designers and professional planners have to deploy all kind of tools to make actually the life in city easier, enjoyable, and also more excited, as we have already heard. I have been engaged with public space design more than 10 years, 15 years, and with placemaking maybe in the last 4 or 5 years. And I think it could be useful to somehow explain that placemaking has 4 main pillars when we talk about it as a method and a tool to bring urban change in our cities. How can placemaking contribute to change is it stimulates social empowerment. It contributes to climate adaptation. That's something that it's very valuable and that will become even more valuable in the future. Placemaking is also part of the area development. Usually public space is all the time within different planning acts, but really placemaking for area development is something that is very important and that really brings more value to public space. And finally, placemaking is experimental method. It can be very very much connected to the change in terms of using culture and cultural production to stimulate the change in our cities. So these 4 pillars are also the 4 main aspects of how placemaking is influential for the urban development. I'm going now to connect these 4 pillars with some examples from the city of Rotterdam. For those of you who are not really familiar with the background or the context of the city, it is second largest city in the Netherlands after Amsterdam, but it has a very modest population of only 650,000 inhabitants. So compared to, Indian cities or other European cities or Asian cities, it's really a very small place. But nevertheless, it's among biggest international maritime ports. It's the biggest European maritime port and a major European transportation hub. So there is a lot of industrial activities. There is a lot of mobility, a lot of important infrastructural lines. And for a longer period of time, the city has been considered as a kind of, this gray industrial area with a lot of cars and a lot of movement. And since last 15, 20 years, city has really reinvented itself by investing more in public space and investing more in the quality of life of public spaces. Placemaking as social empowerment in the city of Rotterdam has always been a very important, let's say, activity. You have to understand that among Dutch cities, Rotterdam is one of the poorest, let's say, or one of the cities that always had this image of being socially awkward, of having a lot of problems, a lot of crime and poverty rates, and everything that is connected with the big harbor. But in the last decades, we have seen this change in how people are committed to their own neighborhoods and to their own streets and places where they live. And placemaking has been a very, very important factor in being the catalyst for this social empowerment. The impact in the neighborhoods are quite small. What we've seen here is one of the favorite activities within the neighborhoods in Rotterdam, but also generally in the Netherlands, and that it's just greening your neighborhood by just simply taking out a few tiles out of the pavement and putting some plants. And even though it's a very small scaled, people really enjoy it. It somehow brings together different kinds of people. It creates this feeling of belonging within the neighborhood. And in the last couple of years, it became such a popular tool that now we have a kind of national competition of taking out the concrete bricks. You know, it sounds a bit silly in English. I mean, in Dutch it's very compact, but in English it's really a long title. When every year cities compete among each other, who is going to make a better neighborhood in with these smaller actions of taking out the concrete tiles. And this year Rotterdam was the absolute winner. You can see it on the right image. This is the neighborhood, which is by accidentally also the neighborhood where I live in. We just won the national prize of, let's say, the small scale placemaking. On some bigger scale, placemaking has also been now adopted more or less as the general value of public spaces in the whole city. Placemaking has been recognized as one of the major forces for the climate adaptation and resilience of the cities. And just to give you some sense of scale and to explain a little bit of these images is that in the next 10 years, the city is going to invest more than 200 million euros in the upgrade of the existing public spaces. In the past, city has been developed as a modernist city. So we had a lot of these kind of mobility-driven, very large profile, a lot of asphalt, unfriendly streets. And a lot of these, let's say, unfriendly boulevards and infrastructure is going to be turned over into green spaces and park spaces in the next 10 years. These images are images of the larger scale developments that have been planned, so the city scale developments. Some of them are commercial, some of them are going to be supported by the city itself. But in this context, placemaking has its role in being the catalyst of climate adaptation on the neighborhood level. So if you allow people to green their neighborhood themselves, you are becoming a part of this bigger movement of climate adaptation and resilience. Third pillar of placemaking as agent of change for area development. This is one of my favorite illustrations of the power of good public space in area development. On the left side is, you can see how the old railway station of the city of Rotterdam looked like in the 50s, very much car-oriented, pedestrian, unfriendly, mobility-oriented, infrastructure-oriented space. And on the right side, you can see how the space has been transformed into this pedestrian-friendly, walkability-friendly, and a nature-friendly area. I remember how the city looked like with this image on the left. I really hated going to the hated having to take the train because it was difficult to come to the station. It was in the evening, it was an unsafe area. And now with some of the, let's say, placemaking approaches, but also better public space design approaches, the station area has been transformed into really this very welcoming and very much loved space. If the weather is nice, people are going to sit, as you can see on the right image, they're going to sit in front of the station, which was completely impossible when the station looked like on the left side. The final pillar, the placemaking as experiments, we have seen with what happened this year with the lockdown. We have seen that some of the experimental placemaking methods, like converting parking lots into little parklets or organizing parking days when these parking lots were transformed into the micro artistic areas. We have seen that those smaller experiments and those cultural experimentations suddenly became the main thing this year, right? Because during the lockdowns, it was almost impossible to keep the distance the way it was before the lockdowns. So, in order to kind of create environment to still have people on the streets, respect the physical distance, but also allow all the shop owners and the restaurant owners to still have some kind of audience and clients coming by. These cultural experiments, which have been undertaken 5, 6 years ago, are suddenly deployed on a very much larger scale in the city of Rotterdam. So it's very important to use placemaking as experimental tool, as cultural tool, because then some of those temporary or event-driven activities can become much more important and incremental at one point of the time. Um, in my second part of this presentation, I'm going to look a bit deeper into the, let's say, theory of placemaking and the practice of placemaking. The theory of the placemaking at Isocarp, the International Society of City and Regional Planners. For those who are not familiar with Isocarp, we organize each year a World Planning Congress. In 2019, we organized our 55th World Planning Congress in Jakarta, in Indonesia, with the topic Beyond the Metropolis. And among different sessions, we had a lot of sessions which are, or let's say, a lot of session contributions, which are referring to placemaking as a phenomenon, as a method, as a scientific experience, as a scientific approach, as a practical approach, as a capacity building approach. So we had this variety of all different kind of papers treating the subject of public space and placemaking. Across the context during the Congress in 2019, we had the most contributions dealing with placemaking and issues of placemaking from the Middle East, from Southeast Europe and Southeast Asia. I'm going to give you just a very short overview on of those papers and case and examples, and I will connect them to the 4 pillars of placemaking I was talking about before. So from the examples we saw at that Congress coming from the Middle East and from the Gulf states, we have seen that placemaking has been seen as incremental for social empowerment, but also very important for the area development, especially when public space needs to be transformed into a space that is inclusive, that allows cities to be open for everyone, to accommodate different social groups, and to emphasize the social cohesion. Another important context characteristic of placemaking in this area, in this particular part of the world, is that in the Middle East and in the Gulf especially, the cities are starting to give more value on the less and small rather than just on the skyline. So we see this trend saying the street line is just as important as the skyline. So that's how this how placemaking is shaping cities in this particular part of the world. In the Southeast Europe, placemaking is taking more shape into social empowerment and experiments, especially in the countries of the East Europe, which are experiencing the post-socialist city making, let's say, or the post-socialist transformation, when a certain model of how the cities have been made is not viable anymore and has left a lot of unused and disadvantaged, unattractive public spaces, especially in the suburbs, in the Eastern European cities. Those places are now using the method of placemaking to kind of give a rise of the bottom up initiatives, allowing people living in those neighborhoods to enjoy public spaces through experimentation and a small, usually artistic interventions in that space. So it's a kind of bringing value to those forgotten suburbs and to those unattractive public spaces in the post-socialist areas. Finally, one of the examples we have seen at the Congress in Jakarta from Southeast Asia is, of course, the role of placemaking for the community building, but also for climate adaptations. This project was really very valuable for all of us to see and share, and that is showing how better public space design can bring safer access to schools. So again, it's really very much about improving the everyday life of citizens, the everyday roots, the everyday functions of citizens. And if you can see here in the before and after view in this study, the before view as a context that is familiar for many Asian cities, which is a very much car dominated, very much vehicle dominated, making it unsafe for the neighborhood. In the after view, you can see how with these smaller interventions in public space, it can become a much more pleasant area for school children, but also for caregivers and other citizens. I'm going now a bit towards the closure and towards some nice and exciting projects I did together with Placemaking Europe and Placemaking X, which are, as you know, also great supporters of the Placemaking India network. And I would like to show you this video. I hope it will. Yes, okay, so it will. It works. I would like to show you this little video which illustrates the Tool Test Day initiative of the Placemaking Europe. And I hope you will enjoy it. It just shows what can be done with placemaking and how we do it as a tool to test different methods in placemaking. Okay, so that was a little overview of what we did this year within the Tool Test Day and Placemaking Europe. And finally, what is going to happen in 2021? I have no idea how the placemaking movement will act in 2021. But I think what we have a big task ahead of us, and that's actually returning the trust in public space. It's one of the formulations of placemaking India. Already in the beginning of this year, we have found this sentence of bringing back the trust in public space as a task that it's definitely in front of all of us. And next to the bringing trust in public space, it's also looking into how can we make placemaking part of the conversations around urban and public space policy and urban climate adaptation, as well as a disaster reduction and recovery. I think those are the topics we will be dealing with, not only next year, but also in the years ahead. And I'm happy to be part of different think tanks around the placemaking methods within Isocarp, within my own practice, but also within Placemaking India and Placemaking Europe. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the questions and the discussions.
Thank you, Milena. I'll come back to you with the questions at the end of this conversation.
Yes.
And actually, when you were speaking, I remembered there is a saying: if you want to change the mindscape of the people, change their landscape. So I'm sure
yes,
very well. The Europe is very established in culture tourism as well and placemaking concepts. In fact, we have a lot to learn. But actually, I also tell you something. The placemaking is Indian culture itself. If you look at, our public spaces like our streets and our squares and our religious places. In fact, our houses also, we had this verandas where people used to come and interact and gossip and play and live. But as we adopted this urbanization, I think Maheep sir agrees with me, and we went somewhere wrong. Our streets now are looking very much like a parking spaces.
Yes.
So we have a lot to kind of, now we have to have this dialogue going forward, and we also equally looking forward to participate in Placemaking India event. And with that, actually, I will ask, Shoba to share her views. In fact, we always say, I am into tourism destination marketing, and we always go and promote countries, cities, and places as, destinations for tourism, investment, and visitors. So we always feel that the cities are not really the destinations. New York is not really a destination. The New York, like the Times Square, is a destination. So if you look at Hyderabad is not really a destination. The Charminar is a destination. The Lord Bazaar is a destination. Golconda is a destination where a lot of activities are happening, and people get a sense of the place, and they will get to see the cultures, and they'll connect with the community. They will get to taste the local food, and that is where actually, and Shoba comes from. And Shoba, will you be able to share some kind of views on how we can actually bring this destinations within cities as points of culture tourism, points of experience for the tourists and visitors? Up to you.
Thank you, Vishala. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maheep. Thank you, Milena. It was great listening to you all. And like Vishala rightly pointed out, I think at a very micro level, the way we used to live traditionally, with a space for everything and everything in its place, kind of really reflected the way how and where we have to place a few things. Like, people were not allowed to come into the inner sanctum, so you kind of met people in an outside area. You left your shoes outside. All these things, when you think about it and look at what's happening today in the pandemic, I think these are great ideas to follow. I've been traveling quite a bit in the last 2 months, and I was in Calcutta yesterday and did a fantastic walking trip of Calcutta. Um, for me, a city is a cultural experience, and to try and move cities away from what they were by pulling down everything that was a part of its present or its past or what it is evolving into, whether it is its inherent green spaces or its urban forests, is, I think, one of the dilemmas that India faces today. I believe that a great place and a beautiful place and a healthy place to live is also a great place, healthy place, and a beautiful place to visit. So for a tourist to be for a traveler to want to come to a certain place, urban or rural, it is very important for that particular place to be a great place to live. Another problem I actually combat with all the time is our sense of what we want to make out of urban spaces. We want to, I mean, why is Mumbai India's New York, right? Mumbai is Mumbai. Mumbai has, many cultural layers. Why isn't the building, the original buildings that we had? Why don't our cities have a certain character in their buildings? They need, and what happens to all our to our beautiful heritage, right? And so when you're planning, when you're place making, what happens to that the corner shop, the samosa wala who used to sit in that corner shop, who was very popular and used to go to that particular corner to eat a kachori or a samosa, right? So what happened to living spaces? That has to kind of become a part of the perspective when you're talking about place making. And walking in Calcutta, and yesterday I was quite moved by, not moved, in fact I was just thinking, when will we ever get a grip on and get a balance with our urban and our historical past, and our urban needs and our historical past, and create a balanced ecosystem where the residents are welcome, travelers find it interesting, and it becomes a great place where people, even residents feel proud about and want. You don't want it to be another destination. And India has so many beautiful cities. Bhopal, and one of the challenges for tourism in this pandemic is, with the absence of business travel, we are all struggling to figure out how and what can bring travelers into our urban areas. Why would anybody want to travel to Calcutta? I remember people asking me, where can I go for my vacation? And I said, why don't you go to Calcutta? The museums have opened up. It's looking fantastic. But they said, no, we don't want to go to an urban space. So talking from a tourism perspective, what is it? Whether it is India for Indians or Westerners, travelers from abroad wanting to come to India, what is it about an urban scenario that will entice them to spend 2 to 3 days sitting in a place? So I think one of the things is, of course, the culture of a place. Like Delhi has a culture, Mumbai has a culture, Hyderabad has a culture. With the culture comes also its living spaces that I called about. Also, what do we do with our heritage buildings? There's so many heritage buildings that are just crumbling, and it's a sad, having walked the Dalhousie Square to get into one of the lanes to see rows upon rows of the old corporate houses, the jute house, the tea house, and the other beautiful buildings that are of Art Deco architecture and things, are completely crumbling down. Now, okay, so this is, of course, it takes a lot of money. So if I'm doing a walk, how am I supposed to be looking at these places? There is no place. There is no place to stand slightly away and get the whole picture, the whole thing into our frame. And if you're talking about giving places, giving space to people, and giving place to the traveler and the resident and the vendor and whatever have you, or something like that, this is a lot of space. So when we're talking about Indian context, I think we cannot keep away the population out of this. And one thing I noticed yesterday, and when you thought, why can't we look after our heritage and things like that, I noticed below these beautiful buildings were thousands of people trying to make a day-to-day living. The walls were full of soot because that particular person is doing a thriving business selling sugar, but toast and salted toast and chai to people who are walking around them, or probably to an office building there. So for me, building urban spaces, which is also interesting for tourists, for also interesting for travelers, or even today for its own residents to discover its own spaces rather than standard places that that look the same from one block to the other, is about wanting to explore its own city, is to have its original intent of the city intact, to keep its heritage places intact, to keep its to keep it living spaces or trading spaces intact. That is how it becomes interesting for a person to do. I mean, so if a particular area like the Bow Bazaar or the Lal Bazaar, where these places were very, very were very popular for certain things. You went to eat chaat at one particular place, and so how do you bring that language back into a situation that is not only attractive for travelers as well as for tourists? The other thing I struggle with is what are we doing with our green spaces? There are so many green spaces the original development plan for Delhi, and I'm not even going to go into the government spaces or into Lutyens' Delhi. I'm talking about the planning that DDA had made. It always had a park in the center. It also had a little bit of there was the panwala, or there was the person who used to do your iron. He was called the istriwala. So these were the urban spaces, also accounted for everyday workplaces for people who kind of provided their services to the office. So these places we are losing. In fact, when we moved to Gurgaon, one of the things that really bothered me, that my children were completely unfettered by the rest of their thing, because if they left one block, they were in a place where nobody knew anything. While for us, when we were growing up, if we were smoking in the next block, somebody would see and come and go and give it. So these kind of spaces created safe havens, not only for you, for also for travelers. Now that safe haven in a long stretch of road where, I mean, Gurgaon has no eyes anymore. So for a tourist, or even for somebody wanting to do staying in a hotel, wants to go for a run, for a long stretch, there is nobody, there's no one in sight. Right, it's a very scary thing. So for an urban space to also become a safe space for a tourist, I believe it should keep its heritage identity intact. It should keep its cultural identity intact in terms of old spaces that can be repurposed into, say, museums or performance halls and things like that. The number 3, I think, is also to, where their famous marketplaces, given that these are pandemic times, have to be cleaned up. Now, cleaning up is a big issue. So I feel bad that I'm walking with travel tourists and I have garbage all over. I mean, on either side of the street, and at my feet everywhere I'm trying to jump into. So that is where I think, where Maheep said, it is also a people to people partnership, right? When as a resident of a city, if you're proud enough to know that this is going to be seen by somebody who's coming from abroad, who might take pictures and post on things like that, I would be very, very careful what I do. So the people partnership that you were talking about, I think, was really something I appreciated. Finally, I'd like to say that at the end of it, any city, any country, as such, any destination has to be the primary goal of any tourism or hospitality product is to keep the identity or to keep the integrity of a destination alive. And the second is, of course, to ensure that the primary resources of that city or destination belongs to its residents. And this is something I keep saying, so when tourists come, we have to facilitate for travelers and tourists to see where they would like to place their garbage. Hotels have to be very conscious about, having lap pools in city hotels, whatever, little water bodies or tanks they want to build in their rooms, not allowed. I mean, cities have a huge water issue. Electricity, I mean, it has to become mandatory for when you're talking about placemaking and perspectives, and if you want tourism to be included in it, I think the planning also has to include the primary facilities that a resident is the right of a resident, rather than the privilege for a tourist. I think we lose that perspective from time to time when we try and place the tourists' needs over the residents' needs. And like I said in the beginning, a good place, a beautiful place, a healthy place to stay and live is a beautiful place for travelers and tourists to travel to.
Excellent, Shoba. In fact, I completely agree with you. And the tourist experience is actually a resident experience. What we experience in cities, that's exactly what our visitors also and tourists also they experience. And I'll go back to Maheep sir. And before that, actually, I would like to say one thing. You spoke about the public participation, and in fact, Maheep sir also said that in the planning we need to involve citizens because they are very important stakeholders. But you know what I have seen, I have in fact, I have seen in one of the newspaper when there was one of the VVIP coming to the city of Hyderabad, and they gave a full page ad in the front page, and the next day there was a Hyderabad master planning and call for civic engagement, and that advertisement was not even seen, and that was somewhere in the corner, as if that government didn't want anybody to come in and tell what they want. And citizens definitely want the public spaces to be more accessible, safe, inclusive, and original, hygienic, green, and we have to remind their identity. Like, why do you want New York, Hyderabad to be New York? Hyderabad is Hyderabad. And why do we want anything else? We want a better Hyderabad or a better Amsterdam or a better Rotterdam. So we have to improve on our own cultures and our own this thing. So going back to Maheep sir, in the urban planning, because planners play a very important role from the top down approach. How do you what do you think, like ways to increase the public participation? Like, how do you collect what exactly the citizens and residents want? Do they need more and more flyovers? Do they need more and more civic infrastructure, or do they need more parks and streets? So how do you actually map their intentions and intent in the city? So can you please share some views on that? And also, like, not only government, I'm sure that you are working with a lot of private large scale development as well. And we have seen this man-made cities and large scale, like 400 acres or 500 acres development. So how it is different from the public space planning to the private space planning? What is happening there? Like, you can share some views about that. We are actually running out of time. Maybe we can actually quickly go around and then ask these questions, and we can close that.
Okay, Vishala, thank you for this opportunity. Quickly, because we don't have much time. I think what Shoba was saying is very important. Is the character of the place is very important. So, and cities are competing, and even Milena was mentioning that it's a good thing. But then the aspirations of the residents and the visitors and the economic growth and the social development, kind of inclusive aspects of the society and the different classes. All this is going to be a complex thing as we go forward. The population is increasing every day in the city, so pressures are increasing. In that context, you have to understand that even the governments are under tremendous pressure. So when there was no precedent or legacy of structured public consultation, right, and because some of the laws mandated a typical type of methodology of giving a time frame and giving advertisements, what has happened is that the society has changed rapidly and the people are more aware. So one part of it is what the governments are trying to do or should do, and they should now compete between themselves to be more consultative. And we should all work towards creating that competition, that this city has involved the participation, of the citizens more than the other. I mean, I'm taking it on a positive side, although a lot of questions are there, why the governments are not able to do it, and there are various reasons for that. There is an intent, but probably there's no methodology or the methodologies are being improvised, and there's no precedent. So we try to do this as consultants play an important role also to balance between the government and the civil society, because a lot of civil society is and also seen as activists or litigants. But then in many cities across the world, these legal battles have actually created the knowledge base for better partnerships between the governments and the civil society. So civil society and groups, the more structured and coordinated they are, will make a lot of difference. And this is also a hallmark of many cities across the world. So that movement has to kind of move forward. So I mentioned about Shoba's comment, then about government's participation using these methodologies. So I would like to kind of not take much of the time, although you asked many questions. If I miss out, you can ask me again. That the kind of participation requires much more structuring, and kind of a communication is going to be a major skill and art, how to do that. And then I can tell you that initially, 20 years ago, the groups which were seen as litigants by the government are now in Hyderabad, some of them, not all, are partners, especially in the urban greening program, and the role of resident welfare associations. So there is a lot of one a legal side to all this, a social structuring side to all this. But I feel that we need to work, all of us, we need to work a lot more to make this happen. Imagine cities of 10 million and more as we grow. It's just not going to be easy or possible even for these municipalities or corporations or development authorities to manage. This is a huge scale. It has to be through a partnership, and it will take a lot of effort and struggle. And Shoba, quickly, a closing point on that is Delhi DDA model is interesting because the planning authority owns, DDA owned and still owns a lot of land. We have to plan around the whole neighborhood concept in theory, and in many places across the world in practice, is around a school or a park or a public space, right? So in a free market economy, where most of the time we are planning for cities where the government doesn't own the land, right? And we try to influence or enforce to a certain extent a land use, and then that changes over a period of time. So we have to get back to the basics when it comes to neighborhoods, public spaces, public amenities and facilities. So we can do that. And I remembered the point now. Private sector township, the advantage is, although it's a free market economy, they will do it for profit motive, but good planning principles based around these central parks, which normally smaller developers will not be able to kind of provide, large spaces, open spaces, cultural spaces. Even it's a built mall or a complex which has a hotel, a mall, and kind of has an atrium or a central courtyard. These places give opportunities for placemakers to take advantage of and bring in that vitality. The hardware and the software have to work together. So opportunities are there. I would say that we need to work more and discuss more on this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, sir. In fact, I also agree completely with you. We should not get into the activism mode or litigation mode when you want to bring change. As that is when we activated these little spaces, and there was a lot of positive collaborations were happening, and a lot of civic pride was happening. And these are the people who actually took the change forward, and they become change makers in our society in various other fields. We have seen in our own campaigns at least 200 people were actually become change makers later and working in their own areas. So I agree on that. And Milena, we have a question from the audience, like as Maheep sir said, public participation in the planning. But I would like to ask you, after designing the space, like design everywhere it looks good and every place looks good. In fact, we are also, our places also are really now looking beautiful. But how do you make sure that the place is more lively and vibrant, and how do you increase public participation? Is there any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yes, I will give again some thoughts about from the experiences of Placemaking Europe, which is doing a lot in this area of how do you activate the public space even when it's well designed and just there. How do you really bring life? And one of the most important measures, or let's say most important findings, it's what happens on the eye level, right? What happens on this first perception level of where the people move around, or how the square has been built. Because if there is no if there are no good functions on the eye level, if there are no shops or no activities, or if the, let's say, the facades or the buildings themselves are not designed in a way that they're inviting people to enjoy the basement level, then it doesn't matter how beautiful the square is. If, you know, if the walls of the square are not activated, people will not feel fine or safe, or then the design is not enough, you know, beautiful materials are not enough. So that's how it's that's one thing, how to bring life to those public spaces. And of course, as if there is a mix of functions, but if there is a mix of users, but if there is also a mix of users, so different users groups are also very important. And just to go a little bit back to what Shoba was telling us about the, let's say, the role of the tourism and public space in everyday life. In terms of in the city of Rotterdam, again, as you know, we lost a lot of heritage in the Second World War. The city was bombed, so the suddenly the heritage was gone, or just very much fragmented. But in the last 10-15 years, the city really reinvented itself by promoting modern architecture as the showcase and as the best, let's say, tourist attraction point. You know, this completely modern city with full of experimentation and full of modern architecture. So it became attraction in itself in the case when you don't have that much heritage to show. So even for the cities which are kind of coping with how to deal with heritage, or what should they do, I think they, in terms of branding, in terms of finding your own profile, is very important to look into the strong points that you have as a city, whether it's a waterfront, whether it's a special food culture, whether it's a special manufacturing culture. Those are the values that can be put up front, that can be given a face in the city, even if the buildings are not there, if in terms of heritage buildings, you know. So that's something I wanted to add to the presentation of Shoba.
So, yeah.
Sorry, I've seen that some of the heritage buildings, like I said, in Calcutta, the Metcalfe Hall is now a great representation of the city of Calcutta, of its inspirations, its books, its filmmakers, you know, its poets and things. So it's a great. They've created such a beautiful space. It's not only wonderful for a traveler, for people seeking museum and museum experiences. I see a lot of young people there. I mean, it was inundated with young people. And for me, that is, I mean, more than from a tourism point of view, for me to have children dip into their own, the highlights of their city is wonderful, right? Something that they can carry on. And then they made another way to repurpose an heritage building, like the currency house is now a fabulous museum. You know, its domes had fallen down. They just used the fallen domes as arches, and it just creates a fantastic space to exhibit you know, art or sculpture and things like that. So I mean, it just, there's so many ideas. And I liked your bit about experimenting, you know, so there is also spaces that can become experimental areas. I know in Gurgaon, the Horizon Center has a has a huge open space with restaurants on one side and offices on the other. And it's a concrete space and surrounded by these huge high-rise buildings. But suddenly on Saturdays and Sundays, it becomes a very, very vibrant area because the organic markets are happening there. One day I found an art exhibition in that space. So moving, moving interest can actually create vibrant spaces, I think. So there's no dearth of ideas. Performance areas, you know, suddenly in the middle of South Calcutta, there was a dance performance happening right on the street from back and forth. I mean, it just so much to do. And I think you guys are doing a great job with this idea of planning, you know, of planning perspectives. And I wish you all the best.
Yep.
So thank you, Shoba. And Milena, you spoke about the right point that we need to build the user base as well. And that's exactly where we are working. We are actually building and enabling place-based networks, and our members are culture and creative entrepreneurs, and we are actually educating and creating awareness among them of the need of activating these public spaces and privately owned public spaces. As Shoba rightly said, Horizon Center is a privately owned public space. So there is actually a lot of scope, and there is no limitations of doing culture markets or flea markets or performances. But when we have to do this in a public space, that is when the challenge comes. You need to apply for permission. You don't know, it is not in our control, right? So that is where actually we need to come up with more of a strategic place programming, and we need to enable place-based networks so that these people will be more aware of how to use these public spaces, which are actually beautifully designed by designers like you, and beautifully planned by people like Maheep ji and the government as well. So with that, we are actually coming to the conclusion of this dialogue, and thank you so much for joining. It means a lot. This is our first dialogue, and we want to do more and more dialogues. This is from more of like understanding what's happening all over the world and in the Indian context, and next dialogues will be more of about the technologies in public spaces, and how do we create the programs in public spaces, and so on and so forth. I want you to also to share some of the topics what we can be discussed for the further dialogues. And is there anything that you would like to share, sir, Maheep sir, as a closing statement for this dialogue?
I think that it's a good beginning, a wonderful beginning, and we need this sector of expertise for managing the spaces and operationalizing the ideas. And so it's a great job, Vishala, and we should all work together and kind of encourage this kind of discussions, these kind of discussions and activities, which will result in projects and reality on the ground. So it's a great beginning, and it's wonderful to be here, and we should keep talking and then working also. Thank you.
Milena, anything you would like to say?
Yes, I'm really, first of all, thank you for inviting me and for inviting all of us into starting these kind of dialogues and also from my position as a senior advisor to Placemaking India, I would like to say this is just the beginning of really great series of opportunities we can do together in India with exchanges from outside, and I hope I can contribute to that very soon. I think there is really a lot of potential for some good projects and good work in India.
Shoba?
Yeah, great. I mean, sounds really amazing. And thank you, Vishala, for getting us all in. I think these are three very different people speaking, but with the same, with the same idea of preserving, protecting, and bringing people and making spaces inclusive. I think that's the whole, this is what I hear loud and clear. And Milena, great images that you showed. I was particularly impressed about the one that had a lot of greenery. Thank you. Thank you, Maheep. So that was really great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So thank you everyone once again for all the attendees and Placemaking India, Vinita and my colleagues Dimple and Sharada, who worked really hard behind this session. And thank you audience. And this link is available on our YouTube channels and our Facebook. And we will also be coming up with more and more sessions. And keep in touch with us. And thank you so much for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishala. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Everyone. Bye-bye.